Commission Board of Commissioners. It is 9:01 on February 19th, 2021, and I'm calling to order the special meeting of the board. The process we're using for today's meeting is authorized by Governor Gavin Newsom's Executive Order N2920, which he issued on March 17th, 2020 to address the COVID-19 public health emergency. The meeting is occurring by video conference with all board members, president, CEO, Housing Commission staff, and council participating by video. We're going to go ahead and go through ask each member to indicate their presence as I say their name. Vice Chair Ryan Klumpner.
Here.
Commissioner Dion Akers.
Good morning, I'm here.
Commissioner Maggie Davis.
Here.
Commissioner Johanna Hester. Commissioner Keely Hubbard.
I'm here.
And Commissioner Mitch Mitchell. Okay, so Commissioners Hester and Mitchell will not be attending this morning. No members of the public are in attendance. However, members of the public may watch the video conference and hear the audio of today's meeting being streamed live online. The agenda for today's meeting included a link to the website for the Commission Board of Commissioners where the public can access the live streaming for today's meeting. The public has also been provided with an alternative opportunity to provide comments to the board through an online comment form. A link to this form was included on the agenda for today's meeting, which is posted on the website www.sdhc.org on Wednesday, February 17th, 2021. The agenda and public comment form explain that comments about items on the agenda will be read into the record if they were submitted by 4 p.m. yesterday, Thursday, February 18th, 2021. In addition, non-agenda public comments submitted by 8 o'clock this morning will be read into the record. There were no non-agenda public comments submitted for today's meeting. So we'll go ahead and move on and open it up to any commissioner comments. Do we have comments from commissioners? Okay. Report from the president and CEO. Rick?
Thank you, ma'am. Just one very brief item, that is to thank the board for coming together at short notice for this special meeting. As you all know, there's a significant item going before the city council on Monday having to do with the Housing Stability Assistance Program, which we've been asked to administer. And this is simply to get this board's recommendation to the Housing Authority and City Council on Monday. And with that, ma'am, I'll turn it back to the chair. And you're muted, Madam Chair. There.
Thank you. And I just want to reiterate, thank you to the commissioners and to the staff for making this meeting possible. Our first item is item 100, the approval of the proposed City of San Diego COVID-19 Housing Stability Assistance Program. No public comments were submitted. The Housing Commission's Deputy CEO, Jeff Davis, and Senior Vice President of Rental Assistance, Susanna Valladolid, will present this item whenever you guys are ready.
Thank you for calling Giant Partner.
Good morning, commissioners. I'm Jeff Davis, Deputy Chief Executive Officer. With me is Susanna Valladolid, our Senior Vice President of Rental Assistance and Workforce Development. This morning, we are proposing a new program in collaboration with the city to help renters with low income who have been affected by COVID-19. Renters occupy about half of all the rental housing units in the city of San Diego. About 54% of city renters were already spending more than 30% of their income on rent before the COVID-19 pandemic. Additional financial hardships have occurred for many San Diego families due to the pandemic and the actions taken to help prevent the spread of COVID-19. Mayor Todd Gloria and his staff have been working with the Housing Commission to develop a program to help these families, which we are presenting to you for your consideration today. Next slide, please. The COVID-19 Housing Stability Assistance Program will help pay past due unpaid rent and utilities for households in the city that have low income and experience financial hardship due to the pandemic. Federal funds allocated to the city of San Diego are supporting this program. The Federal Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2021 included $25 billion for emergency rental assistance program funds for state, local, and tribal governments throughout the United States. These funds included $2.6 billion for the state of California. Mayor Gloria announced on January 21st that more than 42 million of these funds were allocated directly to the city of San Diego from the U.S. Department of Treasury. Then on February 5th, the mayor announced an additional $45.5 million allocated to the city through the state's coronavirus relief fund, as approved in State Senate Bill SB 91. In addition, last October, the City Council authorized the allocation of $5 million from the Federal Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, or CARES Act, for a rental assistance program. Combining these funds into the proposed COVID-19 Housing Stability Assistance Program will maximize the assistance that we can provide to households with low income. Next slide, please. Senate Bill 91 provided 3 options for accessing and administering funding. Under the state option, the City of San Diego would transfer its allocation of federal funds to the state for the administration of one program at the state level. Landlords and tenants would access funds through the state partnership with Local Initiative Support Corporation, or LISC. This option would require the use of the state model of paying 80% of past due rent to landlords, and if funding is available, 25% of upcoming rent to tenants. If a landlord refused 80% as payment in full for past due rent, the tenant then could receive 25% of the amount they owe in arrears and upcoming rent, again, depending on funding availability. The second option is a local program. For this option, the city would receive a block grant from the state and administer funds directly. These state funds would be combined with the funds the federal government allocated directly to the city. The local program option also would require using the same state model for payment of 80% of past due rent to landlords, and if refused, paying tenants 25% of the amount they owe. And then the third option being a hybrid program. Under this option, the city would administer a local program with the $42 million it received directly from the federal government. However, the state would administer the $45 million it allocated to the city. In the hybrid program, the city administered program would not be required to follow the state model for payments. And next slide, please. After evaluating these 3 options, the city determined in consultation with the Housing Commission that the second option, the local program, was the best option for San Diego. This local program option provides for local administration of the funds, helps to ensure that the funds are distributed in a timely manner, and it limits the confusion for at-risk households because the funds are available through one City of San Diego program. Incidentally, the County of San Diego and the City of Chula Vista have also chosen this local program option for programs that they will operate for their jurisdictions. And also we wanted to point out that we are in discussions with the City of Chula Vista and the County of San Diego, looking for opportunities to collaborate, to provide easier access to the 3 programs, and to minimize potential confusion among residents throughout the region who need this help. Next slide, please.
The state requires at least 65% of the funds to be obligated no later than June 1st, 2021, or a plan must exist to expend all of the state allocated funds by August 1st, 2021. However, those deadlines do not apply if the city can demonstrate a plan to allocate all of the funds within the federally required timelines. Under federal requirements, 65% of the federally allocated funds must be obligated no later than September 30th, 2021, and all of the federally allocated funds must be expended no later than December 31st, 2021. Next slide, please. The proposed Housing Stability Assistance Program would help pay rent and utilities for households with low income. That is up to 80% of San Diego's area median income, or $92,400 a year for a family of 4. However, the program would prioritize households earning less than 50% of the area median income, or $57,750 a year for a family of 4. Households with at least one adult who have been unemployed for 90 days would also receive priority. Under California Senate Bill 91, landlords can receive a payment equal to 80% of their tenants' arrears for the period of April 1st, 2020 to March 31st, 2021. The landlord would be required to agree to forego the remaining 20% of the arrears. If a landlord declines this provision, the program can pay 25% of the tenant's arrears. Funding requirement regulations require program to prioritize paying past due unpaid rent prior to issuing prospective rent payments. If funds remain available in the program after rental arrears have been cleared, the landlord can also receive a payment of 25% of the upcoming rent for the months of April 2021 through June 2021. The proposed program also will include help to pay past due unpaid utilities such as electricity, gas, water and sewer, trash removal, and energy costs such as fuel oil. Telephone, cable, and internet service are not eligible for utility assistance, and utilities paid by the landlord are considered rent. The program can pay utility arrears for tenants at the same time that rent arrears are paid. Next slide, please. This slide shows the criteria to determine if a household is eligible for assistance from the proposed program. The criteria includes the tenant has a City of San Diego address, household income is at or below 80% of area median income, with priority for households at or below 50% of area median income. The household has an obligation to pay rent. The household does not currently receive rental subsidies. At least one member of the household has a reduction of income or other financial hardship due to COVID-19, and the household experienced or is at risk of experiencing homelessness or housing instability. Next slide, please. If the program is approved, City of San Diego residents will be able to begin applying no later than March 15th, 2021. An online application portal will be available to accept applications and required documents from residents. Applications will be accepted from tenants and landlords or community-based organizations submitting them on behalf of tenants. The Housing Commission will collaborate with community-based organizations to help with community outreach and to help households with their applications, especially those without internet access. We also anticipate working with 211 San Diego to provide customer service and application assistance. Next slide, please. To increase awareness of the program and help as many eligible families as possible, the Housing Commission has developed a comprehensive outreach strategy. On February 4th, the Housing Commission added to its website a link for interested households to sign up to receive information about the application when it's available. The Housing Commission shared information about how to sign up for this interest list on flyers distributed to City Council members' offices, approximately 60 community-based organizations, landlord associations, and households on the waiting list for ongoing rental assistance. To date, more than 3,300 households have signed up for information about the Housing Stability Assistance Program application. Additional outreach efforts, if the program is approved, would include collaboration with the mayor's office, council members' offices, and community-based organizations to distribute information in communities throughout San Diego, mailing program information to utility customers in collaboration with the City Public Utilities Department and SDG&E, potential direct and or email to households in zip codes that the state identifies as most impacted by COVID-19, email to more than 90,000 households on the waiting list for Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Rental Assistance, English and Spanish language news media, and public service advertising on English and Spanish language television and radio and in community newspapers. We are also grateful to the members of this board for working with us to reach out to labor groups, low-income students, additional nonprofit organizations, industries heavily impacted by the pandemic, utility customers, and property owners affected by unpaid rent. Next slide, please. Staff is requesting that the board recommend that the Housing Authority take the actions detailed in the staff report and on the next few slides. First, authorize a memorandum of understanding between the city and the Housing Commission for the oversight and administration of the proposed Housing Stability Assistance Program. Next slide, please. Further, authorize the Housing Commission to amend its fiscal year 2021 budget in the amount of $92,211,316 to provide emergency rental assistance and or utility assistance to households with low income in the City of San Diego that experience a financial hardship due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and to cover administrative expenses in accordance with federal and state funding requirements. Next slide, please. In addition, authorize the Housing Commission's president and CEO or designee to take the following actions. Modify the program if necessary without further action by this board or the Housing Authority, but only if such changes comply with the terms of the executed MOU and are necessary to fulfill federal and state funding requirements. Substitute approved funding sources with any other available funds as deemed appropriate, contingent upon budget availability. Take such actions as are necessary, convenient, and or appropriate to implement this approval and delegation of authority upon advice of General Counsel, and execute all documents and instruments that are necessary and or appropriate to implement these approvals in a form and format approved by General Counsel, and to take such actions necessary and or appropriate to implement these approvals. This concludes our presentation. We are available for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Susanna, and thank you, Jeff. I do want to note that Commissioner Mitchell has joined us, but with that, we'll go ahead and turn it over to questions. Do any of the commissioners have questions or comments? Okay. I did briefly. So I appreciate the coordination between county and Chula Vista. I think the other jurisdiction engagement is smart to minimize some of the confusion. We talked about that at the last meeting. Are there other cities in the county that are receiving these funds that we know of, just from a defensive positioning?
I don't believe so. And Jeff, you might have better information about this. The way it worked is that the county was going to be the recipient for the rest of the county, other than the entitlement jurisdictions of San Diego and Chula. And I think
Okay.
it's just the three.
That makes more sense. With regard to the 80% of back rent versus just the 25% of rent, has there been any communication with, like the Rental Housing Association in San Diego about what they anticipate that to look like? That's an interesting, I understand that that's SB 91. That's not a commission call, but that is an interesting prospect that they are going to volunteer. So I'm curious what sort of feedback you're getting and how we might be able to be helpful in encouraging folks to still participate.
Jeff or Zana, has there been any dialogue with the industry reps here in the county and the city yet that you're aware of?
So we, part of our outreach and ongoing information plan specifically to the eviction protection program has been to involve landlord association groups. SB 91 also allows for landlords to submit applications on the behalf of tenants. And we believe that the 80% with waiving the 20% is deliberately trying to incentivize landlords to, while they have to waive 20% of the balance to receive an 80% payment, it is much more of an incentive than receiving a 25% payment for the same rental arrears period. So we are hoping that there is collaboration between the landlords to accept that payment. We are also planning on contracting with a third party to provide conciliation and mediation services to both landlords and tenants. So if there are issues that stray beyond the rental arrears periods or have clarifying questions about the waiving the 20%, we can refer our landlords to the third party to have mediation and conciliation between the landlords and the tenants.
Great, thank you. That was going to be another thing I brought up. I'm sure other folks saw that there was some coverage that still lacked really strong numbers, but around evictions that were still occurring during the moratorium, which I understand there are still very legal means by which somebody could be evicted. And the coverage didn't give me a lot of information on that, but I thought it would be a good opportunity to connect folks to those resources if we are already talking to them, because this might be a very key moment in which to introduce them to some of the services that the Housing Commission does have. And then when do you, it's interesting that there's these components of if funds remain. At what point do you say, okay, funds remain, let's pivot to a forward-looking payment system have we worked on that? Is that outlined in 91 somewhere?
It isn't specifically outlined in SB 91. SB 91 does have a recommendation that they would like to see approximately 70% of the funds to be geared towards rental arrears. Once we reach that point, then we do have a green light to proceed with issuing prospective payments. However, it is something that we would have to monitor and discuss internally, is the number of applications that we have incoming, the demand for rental arrears, and if we've cleared the demand for rental arrears, then we can make a decision to close our waiting list application or to proceed with issuing prospective rent payments. So it's either we hit the 70% mark for rental arrears, or we have internal discussions based on the demand for arrears before we issue prospectives.
Okay, so it's not a calendar point, it's the percentage of applications. Gotcha. And so you said there's 3,300 households have signed up already proactively. I think that's really wonderful, and kudos to staff for getting something open so that we can start to gauge to the best of our abilities. This is all very touch and go, but you're hopefully being able to get anticipate some of the rhythm that you're going to be dealing with. 37 households were helped in the previous round, right?
Correct.
And that was a lot less money. So 3,300 still probably solid, but how is there any indication about where the majority of those households are hearing about the program?
So in our upcoming application, we are going to track how households hear about the program when they submit an application. We don't yet have that information on the interest portal. What we are tracking on the interest portal is what the need is. So we do have some basic questions on whether households are past due with rent and or utilities, and if so, how much.
Gotcha. Yeah, because this is what was, I think, one of the things I got hung up on the last meeting was that while this feels like two separate tracks, an awareness campaign and a rent relief campaign, they are in fact rolled into one in what is, and this is not the fault of any commission staff, in what I think is an inelegant moment because of the various streams of government and regulations that come with these buckets. And so you're doing a lot at once, which I appreciate, but I think that's where I was kind of going, wait, you're trying to get people to understand, but also they're signing up for a thing and then maybe they get money at the end of it. So thank you for helping me to wrap my arms around this. I don't want to keep asking.
And if I could, Madam Chair, let me point out just a couple of comments on the complexity and scope of this, but a couple of comments that give me some comfort, as a great deal of comfort as well. This is over $90 million to get out the door in a relatively short period of time, or at least 87 in a very short period of time. That's, Zaina, our ordinary 12-month allocation of Section 8 subsidies is about 170 million right now, I believe. So that gives you an idea of how intense this is going to be. The other is that this is a set of regulatory criteria that will govern our decision making as well, but pretty clear guidance from the statewide measure that I think will put us in good stead to justify decisions that we're making, to show that it's in context with the rest of the state. What gives me comfort, if you look, there's two things from last year. If you look back at the emergency rental assistance program last year, of the $94 million of CARES Act monies the city got last year, they initially gave us $15.1 million to allocate in a different but similar fashion for similar issues of past rent due. And Jeff, Zaina, and Tracy, and Coven, and all of our people worked together extremely well to get that done in a very efficient, elegant, on-time fashion. And so much so that the council allocated us an additional $5 million, which we will tack on to this 87 this year. So we've shown, and also last year, shifting gears on a different but related program, the project Home Key, the hotels that we purchased, was one of the, which came out of the state, was one of the most elegant, efficient central government allocated programs I've ever seen in my career. I've been around a long time. So that gives me some faith in this administration that in Sacramento, this will be done in an equally elegant fashion. So I think this is a big nut to deal with, but I have comfort that we've got the skills and the personnel to do it.
Thank you. And points well taken. Because it is a big lift. And Commissioner Mitchell?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I apologize for my delay. I was triple booked this morning, but I did make it onto this. So thank you for this meeting, for the introduction. I guess I have a few questions. I may have missed some of this, but there was an article recently in the paper talking about the sheriff was still doing evictions during last year. Do you remember that, Madam Chair? And I guess I think what the confusion on this is, Mr. Gentry, is that so we're now going to receive this pot of money, and you're going to start allocating money to keep people to bring them up to even, I guess, for the rents that are owed. And so what I couldn't remember is, do you have a long list? You have a long list of people that didn't get money last time. Why didn't the city give you more last year to do? That's first question is, why didn't they give you more? Since there seemed to be more money available and you had a waiting list of people. What was the reason for that? And then second, do you feel pretty confident that this bucket, we will expend all of this money? I think that one of the things I said at the last meeting is it would be a shame if we have any money left, because this seems to be the biggest topic in the state, especially in Sacramento. And I know that we continue to hear it in certain districts here in San Diego.
I'll deal with the second question for secondarily. Jeff or Zaina, would you talk about any carryover from last year we may have had and how we dealt with that?
Sure. So in our first emergency rental assistance program, we were allocated $15.1 million to provide emergency rental assistance. We fortunately were able to expend all of the money and not leave any eligible household unassisted. So every household that applied who met eligibility was provided with the emergency rental assistance.
Okay.
We didn't have any families left over who did not receive a subsidy.
Okay. And the issue that we had was that not everybody you said everybody that applied did receive assistance. So there were probably a number of people who didn't know about the bucket and maybe they didn't apply. Is that a fair statement?
I think let me interject there. I think, as Zaina said, every eligible applicant we served. There were some people who came into us that we referred to the county for the proper jurisdiction. And there were others who didn't qualify under the criteria, but every eligible applicant for the 15.1 million last year living in the city, we served. Nobody was left out. Period. And that's a blanket statement with a punctuation mark.
That makes sense.
This year, this is a lot of money, and this is significantly more. Obviously, even I can do this math. This 87 is more than 15. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And we're going to be were there people who did not know about it? I suspect if I said no, then I'd be wrong. There's all it takes is one person to prove that. And so what we're doing this time is doubling down on the outreach systems that we do.
Yeah. And
try to make sure that not only we do a high-tech outreach, which we have done in the past and will continue doing through media and through our web-based system. And not only and also we want to collaborate with your organization, with SDHC, to make sure that we do outreach with you too, that would reach another cohort of people.
Yep.
But we're also going to do the low-tech part too, and work with local community-based groups to do what I call the laundromat bulletin board system to make sure that we can get to people who otherwise might not be connected. And we're going to do our best. And we're also willing to respond to any and all suggestions from members of the community, including city council members and other leaders, on making sure that we do outreach into every nook and cranny in the city.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. I appreciate that answer. Again, I wanted to make sure that I was clear that, so with the money they gave us, we did spend it all with eligible city residents. And this is as I think the chairwoman would admit, this is much more than 15 million. So we have our work cut out for us, but this is an important focus and one where there'll be a lot of scrutiny. So thank you for the answer.
And I suspect that if we do our outreach properly, then if there's, it's one of those things where if there's money left over, you hope it's because we covered the need and not because we didn't do thorough outreach. But we're going to do outreach as much as we can. And any additional outreach techniques that you all might want to suggest too, we're open to any suggestions you might have.
Thank you. I think there's a lot to appreciate about the regulatory framework here. And my final question, and I'm sure there's other commissioner questions and comments, is the different money, if I'm understanding this correctly, come with their own sets of rules and regs, or if taken together into one pot, do they then conform to one overriding set of rules and regs? In other words, are you tagging each dollar to be accountable to where it's supposed to go? For instance, the Trump administration saw eligibility differently than the Biden administration does. So how are we blocking and tackling for that?
Well, we recognize the confusion inherent in just what you just said now. And what we have elected to do, which the city agreed with, was our recommendation from the Housing Commission that the city agrees with, and also that both Chula Vista and the county agree with, is that we merged both these two blocks of money, both the money that came directly to us from the feds and the money from the feds that went through the state and came to us. We're going to implement it all based on state rules and regs. And those state rules and regs, we think, gives uniformity. Is a lack of confusion, or at least it reduces the prospect of confusion. If we had two different programs ongoing with two different sets of rules, you can imagine the potential would have for misunderstandings and just plain screw-ups that could inhibit the transfer of monies. And added to that, I don't think that philosophically anyone really disagrees with this significant help going to the landlord community, that there be some haircuts involved with them too on what their subsidy amounts are going to be. So I think we agree with the prospects here. We're in uniformity with the city and the county and Chula, and it will reduce the chances of confusion and it will help us get the money to the people who need it.
Fair enough. And then as a follow-up to channel Commissioner Hester, who couldn't be here this morning, those requirements then will leave you with a bucket of ineligible folks, very likely, who are in less traditional setups, less formal setups, highly vulnerable. Is there any flexibility or, kind of plan B to funnel them to financial assistance that would work for them?
I don't think so. I'll defer to Zena and Jeff, go to both of the regs of this one better than I do. But Jeff, I don't think if there
Well,
is.
the state regulations are actually pretty lenient and are looking to make sure that undocumented aliens and those in untraditional landlord relationships are taken care of. So the verification requirements, which actually Zena knows much better than I do, are really written to make sure that those are incorporated.
And that's one reason that we will hold a 5 million carryover from last year, which will be although allocated last year, will be the last bucket we spend, because as you referenced, that came under previous administration's oversight. That has more strings and restrictions attached to it than the new money does. So we think the new money will give us sufficient latitude to go out there. And I'll say something maybe I shouldn't here, but I'm supposing that if statewide and or in any jurisdiction like here, if there's money legitimately left over, not because of lack of performance, but because of a mismatch with need, that because we're following state rules on all the money, it would give us a very good position to go to the state and argue for a repurposing of the money. I suspect we won't get to that. I suspect this money will be absorbed for the need identified. But if it turns out not to be, then we'll have a good argument to petition for the rules to be redirected.
Thank you. Yeah, we clearly have some dueling narratives right now with regard to need, level of need, you know, and I think we're understanding the economic realities of COVID as we go. It's a changing thing. I think the state's budget is indication enough of that. So are there any other commissioner questions, comments?
Yeah.
Vice Chair?
Thank you. I appreciate how quickly everyone's working on such a complex issue here, and that I've been waiting, you know, kind of absorbing the questions asked so far, and yeah, I mean, if I could just frame, I think where we're all coming from is, you know, everyone's trying to figure out how the fewest number of people fall through the cracks, and so as I'm sort of looking at my list of questions here, you know, I hope it's kind of taken in that spirit. So one question is, you know, what, and again, this is kind of channeling the commissioner who could be here today. What does the on the ground outreach through the CBOs look like? Can we just get a brief sort of description of, you know, what that is, especially in the pandemic, because I know that a lot of options are kind of more restricted right now.
Well, I'll start. It's somewhat to be determined. We have a meeting scheduled next week with about a dozen community-based organizations that we have either contracted with last time or look to contract with this time, to hear from them what they think will work for their communities. You know, we want to make sure that the contracts that we are writing and negotiating with them include the efforts that they think will work for their communities. So that's something that's going to be happening next week. We also are looking at contracting with a company that just literally goes out and posts at laundromats, posts at campuses, posts at apartment buildings. So the outreach efforts are still in flux. We're still gathering ideas, gathering, you know, including from this board, but there will be much more of an on the ground effort than there was last time. And again, we're going to be letting our CBOs tell us what they think will work best for each of their different communities.
Thank you. In the first round last year, we had some issues with unresponsive landlords, that a lot of which I know staff kind of worked through. Can you tell us how are we planning to handle that going forward? I was looking at some of the details on this. Maybe I missed it in our program, but on the state program, at least, they have kind of a default mechanism that makes payments to tenants, or are we doing something to that effect that accounts for that tenant who does everything on their end and qualifies and is entitled to it, but then we have a problem making the payment because their landlord is not responsive? Does that just go into the 25% as opposed to the 80%? Is that how that gets handled?
Yeah, we really had a remarkably small amount of landlords that didn't cooperate with us in the first round. So small that we were able to use our philanthropic dollars to help those tenants. The state program, as you mentioned, has that written right into it. If the landlord's not going to cooperate with us, then we can provide the tenant with the funding that they need in order to protect their tenancy, the 25% of the back paid rent. If they pay that to the landlord has to accept it from the tenant, their tenancy is protected.
And Mr. Let me point out that the relationship with the landlord community here is not by accident, and it's not always been there. And it's been a useful, good byproduct of all the work we've done to help reassure landlords to make the homelessness components of our landlord relationships work. So I think if you go back to the last, say, 7 or 8 years or so, and you look at what we've done in landlord outreach, we come up with landlord assurance programs and ways to make sure that they know they're not going to lose money on us, and that, or on our programs, and that we're going to make it work. That we've worked through the 2 different rental associations here in the city to make sure we've got those relationships from a wholesale standpoint in addition to the individual retail. And the relationships are there, I think, pretty thoroughly in the community. We've expanded significantly the number of landlords we deal with over the last half dozen years or so. And I think that's given us a basis now for us, Suzanne and her people, and Jeff and for others, to have credibility in that part of the community. And that's because we've worked on it for a good long time.
Yes, and I'll note that that's certainly not intended to be a critique of the agency. You know, the fact that we had some landlords unresponsive. There's very impressive numbers about landlord satisfaction on those surveys each year and whatnot. But again, I'm just trying to think of the exceptions rather than the rule. You know, who might get missed in the process here. So with that, let me put another scenario to you in mind here. So let's say that and I'm sure that this applies to quite a number of people. Let's say that we had somebody who qualifies income-wise. They've not been able to work during the pandemic, and they received assistance late last year through the county when the county was open, but they're a City of San Diego resident. So as a result, they don't have any arrears because of the assistance they received somewhat recently that covered them up to a certain point, let's say March, right? Yet they still don't have any income, and they still have rent that will be coming due in the coming months. So it seems like that person would be in a tough spot right now if I'm thinking about this, because they will not qualify when this program opens, since they don't have any back rent due. However, they will not be able to make payment on their rent. And then it also seems like there's a reasonable chance with how this progresses that the table could flip on that right around the time that they then have, they've been unable to make rent for 3 months, could be right around the time that we're now opening it up to forward rent as opposed to back rent. I'm assuming that it's not the end of the world for a few months, and that person will still be more or less front of the line, even if we are opening it up to forward rent, by virtue of the fact that they at that point have back rent. Again, I'm just trying to think through the ways in which people could get kind of caught in the gaps here between the different programs over time that we've been implementing.
Well, that scenario, that person would be eligible to assistance, but there are priorities for how the money gets spent. And I'm going to ask Azucena to go through those priorities. But at one of the benefits of the portal that we are developing is that it can stay open. So as people find themselves in a situation that you just described, they may not apply right when this program opens, but they could apply, say, a month later or what have you. But again, the funds must be spent in a priority order, and I'll ask Azucena to go through that priority for you.
Sure. So we would be meeting the state's guidance for ensuring that households that are at or below 50% AMI or have a household member who's been unemployed for 90 days would be prioritized, because the state regulations also require that we disperse payments for rental arrears. We would also be prioritizing families who meet those two priority groups and have rental arrears. If we exhaust all those applications, our next priority group would be households between 51% AMI and 80% AMI that meet eligibility and have rental arrears. If we are able to clear out those funds, and if we have funds available, then we would move forward with eligible households that are current with their rent and are seeking prospective rent payments. So would be subject to funding availability. But as Jeff said, the application would be open. Go ahead.
So the short answer for somebody who does not have arrears by virtue of the fact that they received assistance last year, the short version is, assuming that person qualifies on the AMI, et cetera, because they would have the first time, is essentially that they can still get assistance, but they'll have to miss rent for at least a month and then apply for the assistance as the arrears payment, at least until some future point when it becomes prospective. I mean, so that's how the person would receive assistance in that case. Right.
We would recommend that low-income households apply for rental assistance, even if they're not past due with rent. Because if we do have funding that's available, we could issue payments to those households for prospective rent. We have
So
also.
would we be in that case, would we be tracking essentially what, so if that's the recommendation, let's say that we have, 3,000 people apply that that do not have arrears, but qualify in every other respect, and maybe qualified last year in the first round. How would we be tracking whether, because obviously on their application, they will say that they do not have back rent. So how would we be tracking whether they 2 months from now have 2 months of back rent?
So if there's an application on hand, we are building logic in our portal to track which households are past due and which ones are current with their rent and seeking prospective rent payments. So in the case of having funds available for prospective rent, we would have a database and a ranking order of households to which assist.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. This is a complex system you guys are engineering here. I appreciate you sort of walking us through this. So since we're sort of talking about the portal, what is I think last time we discussed this, it was that it'll be open by the 15th, obviously. What's the status on that, both in terms of, I know we're trying to integrate it with the county, and also there's a whole bunch of new requirements that we weren't dealing with last time. So I assume it requires some significant updating, but where are we at both with kind of like cost and timeline, and how confident are we that that's going to be, smoothly functioning by the 15th?
I'll ask Beto Juarez, our CIO, to address that question.
Yes, we're still on target to open on 3/15. We don't see any potential issues or risks at this point.
Has the cost, have we basically had to start from scratch? Can you let us know where we think this is going to land on the total cost?
It's going to be similar, I think, to the last one, because it is a brand new portal with brand new requirements. As you're probably aware, the state has completely different guidelines for this. And so, yeah, it is essentially, we try to reuse some of the functions from the past portal, but just the technical requirements alone were a beast to really have to reintegrate.
And are we using the same vendor for that as we did the first time?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And the same vendor the county is using.
Got it. So is the county also, are we creating a single portal jointly with the county at this point? And if so, are we creating two separate portals now?
Two separate portals, because they have different requirements, different eligibility, and some other functionality that they're doing differently than we are.
Got it. Okay. The state last year had some major issues with fraud in some of the emergency assistance programs. I'm sure that we've all read about that. Is still a headache. So I feel like I'm just, like it would just be foolish not to ask sort of what we're building into this system to make sure that, most of the questions so far have been geared towards making sure that everybody who should qualify gets it and, has a path to receiving assistance. This would be sort of the reverse of that, which is, how are we going to make sure that people who do not qualify are not receiving it?
So to touch on the state guidelines, the state does have strong language about both allowing for an application that is accessible to at-risk populations and vulnerable populations, but also has language to ensure that there are measures to prevent fraud. They recommend limiting the self-certifications as much as possible. So we have built our application and documentation requirements that would meet both criteria, both allowing for accessibility, but also as preventing fraud. Additionally, as we did in our first emergency rental assistance program, we will actually be voluntarily conducting a quality control or quality audit component to dig down a little bit deeper and confirm certain aspects within the program, just to ensure that applications are meeting guidelines, that we are verifying ownership, tenancy and such. So we do have measures in place to prevent fraud and to meet state guidelines.
And then, so I was talking to somebody at the state about how they're handling this, and the portal, the requirements around the portal that they're contracting have some very intense requirements with respect to, if payments are made in error, ways in which they recover those costs within short periods of time. It was really intense, which I gathered was a reflection of the experience that the state had with other programs last year that went sideways. So what I didn't ask is, are we subject to are we meeting all those same requirements, or are we kind of left to develop our own? And if so, I would sort of point, we might want to take a look at the state, since it seems like they have a very robust kind of fraud prevention requirement in the development of their portal, but maybe we've already done exactly that.
So we've looked at some of their guidelines, and we've implemented some safeguards into our own program that have mirrored some of the states, but we feel pretty comfortable with the program that we've developed. We've had close communication with HCD at the state level to have discussions about application questions, documentation requirements, deduplication efforts for assistance. So we've had thorough discussions and review of the guidelines to put some measures in place.
Thank you. 2 more questions, and then I promise I think that'll cover everything I've got. One, so obviously this is, $92 million is a lot of money, and 10% is essentially what we're working with for the implementation costs, if I'm understanding this correctly. Do we? Can you sort of? This, I don't envy the task you have as far as how you budget out what we're dealing with here, and what I'm getting at with my question is, obviously it would be wonderful if we didn't have to spend the full 10%, because a couple few $1 million is a really big deal to serving an extra number of people that we wouldn't otherwise be able to serve. But on the other hand, we do need to make sure that this is implemented properly, and that we invest enough in the outreach that people are aware of it, and we're dealing with the equity issues around the awareness and the application and the language barriers and all that. So can you explain to me, one, is there a scenario in which we are able to spend more on the actual assistance and less on the overhead, or are we anticipating that it will take the full 10% no matter what? And how are we kind of planning this out in terms of the time frame, because those state requirements on and the federal requirements on when the money is spent, it seems like we need to do enough investment on the front end to make sure it's working properly and we have a robust outreach, but then also we probably need something available to us 3, 4, 5 months from now, in case we need to take additional steps to increase the participation or make any adjustments to it. So we don't have to get super into the weeds here, but can you sort of walk me through how much of that we're planning to spend kind of front end versus leaving in reserve? And if there's a world in which whatever we leave in reserve could actually be, converted into assistance, should we not need it all?
I'd be happy to start with that. With the first $15.1 million iteration, as you know, we were able to not expend all the administration. We're able to turn it over into rental assistance. It required additional authorizations to do that. And this time we're asking for that authorization up front, because our expectation is that we won't need all of the administration, and that we'll be able to convert some of it to rental assistance. Some of the things that still need to be determined for us to know exactly how much admin will be needed is primarily how much staff time are we going to need. And a lot of that has to do with how many times are we going to have to touch each application. If there are enough families that have arrears that we are only touching applications one single time, then that would be the low end of our admin costs. If we find that we're able to go back to these applications and pay for forward prospective rents, then we're going to be touching these applications a second time. We're going to need staff on for a longer period of time. We still have yet to negotiate all of the community-based organization contracts. We sort of find ourselves in an enviable negotiation spot, because we're telling our boards and our housing authorities that we're going to contract with these CBOs in 211. and giving them all the negotiation leverage. But we still are negotiating those contracts, trying to do the best we can to get those at reasonable costs. But we also need to make sure that we have those CBOs and 211 ready to be able to help our applicants with their applications. And then, of course, we have our portal expenses and the outreach, which we're hearing from every angle that we want to do a tremendous, vibrant, robust outreach, which is not inexpensive. So all of these things are still being negotiated and determined. But of course, our effort is to try to keep it at as low as possible so that we can turn that back over into rental assistance.
Fantastic.
Mr. Clemner, the way you asked the question implies the complexity and the push-pull of being effective, but also being efficient.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll point out that the part of the business here that's doing this is AstraZeneca's side, which is used to this kind of high volume stuff, maybe not in this intensity, but is used to this anyway. And to put that in a low tech context, the most efficient way to do anything is to do it right the first time. It's redoing multiple times that costs real money. And so therefore we're putting a lot of effort and intent behind what Beto's doing with the portal design so that the display of information will predicate decisions automatically. The more the machines can make decisions, the cheaper it is as well. The more we can replicate a high volume of the same decisions, the less expensive it is. And that's typical for the voucher side of our business, which AstraZeneca oversees very well, as opposed to, say, the homelessness side that Lisa Jones oversees, where there's a low volume of high human contact that makes it inherently inefficient.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that what we're trying to do here with both the design of the portal and also the design of a relationship with the outreach organizations is to do it right the first time. If we do that properly, then we'll be confident that if there's money left over, either admin or program, then we can reprogram it for other purposes. And that's why we're spending a lot of front end time now doing it right the first time instead of with speed that might have to be redone multiple times later.
So you teed up my final question perfectly here, which is, so how should we think about measuring success if we fast forward 8 months here, because this is quite the complex issue, and I'd like to put a little bit of thought into this right here at the beginning, because for example, it's easy to this is a lot of money. It's easy to imagine we don't have the applications, it's not being spent fast enough, and the explanation could be that there's just not enough people that need the assistance, or it could be that we're not doing a great job of delivering it, and on the back end it may be difficult to kind of sort out whether this was a success, a huge success, or a failure when looking at the same circumstance down the road. So if we're thinking about that right now, how would you all suggest that we think about measuring success of this program?
I think that a good bit of it is, well, people say that numbers dictate, but I would argue that it's the perspective that you put the numbers to that tells you what the numbers mean. And I think if we go through the process properly front end and we have the proper narrative to tell over what we've done, then that will dictate how we measure relative degree of success, because we're always going to have our critics that come in and say you could have done it better.
So I'm gonna push back a little bit on that there, because that sounds like a very subjective, fuzzy way to kind of assess success here.
No, sir.
Okay.
No, it's not fuzzy. And it's
okay.
Not subjective at all. What I'm saying is that if we have money left over, what does that mean? Does that mean we did a failure in outreach, or a success in serving the needs of the community? That's not fuzzy at all, but it requires telling the story of how we got to that number. And I think that's not subjective, but it's interpretive. And there's a big difference there, sir.
Fair enough. I guess let me put it differently. So in the scenario you described, if there were money left over, how would we know whether that was because we had done a fantastic job and there was no need or not enough demand for it, or whether we hadn't done a fantastic job? How would we tell the difference?
by telling our story of what we've done compared to industry standards and compared to what could have been. And if you look at last year, there were complaints last year that we could have done the outreach better. And we have asked for suggestions on how we could have done it better. And frankly, we've gotten nothing back other than a fuzzy, well, you might have thought of something more. What we're doing here is to make sure that we can justify everything we do as reflecting best practices and reflecting a success rather than failure, which reflects both the numbers and the interpretive principle on which you base those numbers. And so what I'm saying is we will tell our story well, and we'll show that the way we went about developing the numbers makes sense within the community context right now.
Yeah,
I'm
still having a hard time with this, and I'm going to push back on your suggestion that you got enough feedback. I certainly provided a lot of very specific feedback, and I know other commissioners have provided very specific feedback as well, and other folks at the city too. So I don't think there's been a lack of constructive suggestions on the outreach. I'm still stuck on if the answer is that when the money is not all distributed, the assessment is, well, what exactly did we do? And if we did, that's still not a measurement of whether the demand is out there. So I don't think we're going to resolve this in this meeting, but my suggestion would be that we at least put some thought into whether there is a way to objectively measure how much rental arrears there are. That would be like one way to go about this. If we don't have enough applications, but there is ample data to suggest that that's because there is almost no rental arrears related to COVID in the market, then we've done our part. If we measure that, if we have a way to measure that and it turns out there is a lot, and yet we still aren't getting the applicants, and that means that we need to do something differently on our end. But that's the type of success or failure assessment that I would be interested in, as opposed to sort of taking a look at, whether we feel like we did a good job with the implementation and therefore the result is what it is.
I honestly don't think that you and I are disagreeing. You just did a better job than I did of explaining what those interpretive principles are going to be. And what I will point out that ever since I've been here, we've abided by the overall approach of continuous improvement. We've always looked to do the job that we do as best we can, learning to do it better tomorrow than we did it yesterday. That's not implying it was done wrong yesterday, but we're continuing to improve going forward. And that's exactly what we're doing here. But for me to tell you right now, I know how to measure whether we did outreach as well as we could have, or we missed something. We're doing everything we know to do. And we did everything we knew to do last year, quite frankly. And I think that we've gotten feedback and we've upped the game and we've done continuous improvement in the way we go about doing it. And I suspect 5 years from now, we'll do a better job than we'll do this year. But we're going to be doing what we know to do with the tools we have and the time period we have and learning from it going forward. I'm not sure I know any other way, sir.
Could I make a suggestion then that in these outreach discussions with, for example, the apartment association or other groups or the landlords that are, that we deal directly with, that we come up with some way to ask them to provide information with respect to, what they believe to be the volume of arrears that are in our jurisdiction. Something to give us some sort of objective piece of, because in the absence of evictions, with the moratorium in place, I don't know how we measure these things, but I'm sure that there are ways that we could.
Well, I might just interject here, Vice Chair, that something that I wasn't sure was quite ready for prime time, but there really is no, and I think you know this as well as we do, there is no rock solid data out there that's going to tell us what the arrears are out there. These funds have been sent to us from the state, from the federal government without that knowledge. What we do know is that we have about 3,300 people who've applied on our interest portal. And what we're seeing is that there's not a lot of people way behind on their rent. The vast majority are showing us 2 to 3 months and less than 6 months worth of rent arrears. And the same with utility arrears. So this idea that there may not be the need out there to expend all these funds is a very real possibility, which again, I think is why outreach is so incredibly important. We need to be able to look back when this is all said and done and feel that we have done all the outreach that we possibly could. Now, can that be measured? Can we show you statistically that we did all the outreach that we possibly could? No, that's what I think Mr. Gentry is talking about. We're going to need to be able to tell our story that our outreach was robust, and we'll still have our critics, but will we be able to say that we did all the outreach that we possibly could to make sure that everybody that has these arrears have the possibility of finding out about this program?
Yeah, I'll say it one more time and then I'll let it go. We're still looking for internal points of reference for an internal program here. So, you know, there's a circular logic to looking at the number of people who apply and then projecting out into how many people we think needed to apply. What I would be very interested in is if there is some way, perfect or not, for us to have an outside of our program measurement of what the demand for this we think is, that we can then benchmark our delivery against. Because if it's benchmarking against itself, it will always be a success. If we're benchmarking at something external, then we have some way to measure.
Mr. Gentry, can I interject something here that I think what you're hearing, and Vice Chair Klumpner and I are on the same page, and you know this as well. We want to be thorough and extremely successful at handling this money and using this money to address the crisis that has beset San Diego. But you know, Vice Chair Klumpner, one of the things that I'm excited about is I've already had conversations with Molly Chase. I think Molly and Jeff and I are meeting next week on Tuesday, because this isn't the mistake that we will make is if we try and do this on our own, right? Yeah. I'm a firm believer and Molly and I had a conversation last week. I've written down the list of people that I want involved in the conversation. I will tell you that the number of people that are in the arrears on the utility bill that we track is significant. I will almost guarantee you that most of the people that are in the arrears on the utility bill are probably in the arrears on their rent. So right off the bat, you know, when we do our part to submit this information to people who are in the arrears on the utility bill, they're going to know about rental assistance, and there may be a large chunk. I think that you know, when Rick talked about low tech outreach and high tech outreach, low tech outreach to me is going to be, let me go to Bridget Browning. Hey, Bridget, you represent the sector that has been devastated by the pandemic. You have hotel employees that have been without a job since February of last year. We need your help with the outreach, because you probably have a number of people who this would benefit. And I think that the apartment association and those are all great. I think the restaurant and Chris Duggan will help, but this has to be a partnership. And I think the success, in my opinion, in part is going to be how well the partnership, how well the partnership is built, and then how strong the partnership works, how strong the partnership is in getting the word out to all the different facets of San Diego that could benefit from this bucket. And success is should we, I had to caution myself on saying, listen, if we're failing if we don't get rid of $92 million. I had to think about it and step back and say, you know what? If everybody knows that we really built this strong coalition that's helping us get the word out, because you asked the question about, do we need to spend all the money? Look, my team's got advertising, right? At SDG&E, we're gonna put it out. I think Cox, I think the telcos, I think there are a bunch of people that are going to help us put this word out, and so that we're comprehensive and get word. That's the first thing right there. Does everybody who needs access to this know it's there? And then, you know, it's not one time, it's several times, and it's in all different locations. But I assume that you and I are on the same page on this, that the Housing Commission could not do this alone. It needs to be a broad coalition. And part of what we have to do as commissioners in judging the Housing Commission is how well that coalition works. And success the definition of success may change, you know, midway through this, because I wish we knew the data, but I will tell you, everybody that's in the rears on utilities, I guarantee is probably in the rears on the rent right off the bat.
And if I could, the fact that utilities are a part of this equation, which was not the case last year, is going to make a huge difference on the bottom line draw as well. That's huge. And the second, let me reinforce something that Commissioner Mitchell just said, and that is Commissioner Hester. Johanna and I had a conversation week before last. It caused me to connect her with Molly, which is then now connected with Mitch. And Johanna is going to be able to connect us with some union contacts that's going to allow us another form of communications as well. So I think as ARCs, as trail of communications.
Yeah, I mean, compliments across the board on all. I absolutely know that you guys are doing, and I'm going to jump on something Commissioner Mitchell just said. I think this is a perfect example. He has the perfect way to look at an external benchmark against which the utility component of this can be measured, because you all have the ability to know exactly how many people are behind and what AMI brackets they're in, and then you can see how many of those people are falling into the program. On the rental assistance, I am fully acknowledging it's a little more complicated because we don't have a single source that can answer that question. But I would also point out, if and when the eviction moratorium ends, there will be an external benchmark. I mean, if there's a crushing wave of evictions that fall within this scope and we had money left over, that would be quite the unfortunate situation for us to find ourselves in. So I would just ask that we look for, there will at some point down the road be an external benchmark of how well we did here. I would ask that we look for a way to measure it as we go instead of waiting for that future point.
Again, I don't think we're disagreeing with you, sir. But I understand your concerns, and we are taking them into account as best we can. I don't think we're in disagreement. I really don't.
Okay, the prize for a job well done is higher standards, bars raised, more questions, more pressure. So I do hope that all of this is, I mean, I'm enjoying the productive conversation that's going. So I hope everybody feels that this is just everybody working toward the same goal. Commissioner Akers, did you have anything you'd wanted to add?
Yeah, I have just 17 or 18 questions that I wanted to go through.
Good. Okay.
Real quick for everyone. Ryan got the first 16 of them, so I'll just stick with my 2. Let's not forget that we're trying to do good work for the community, and we're all dedicated to this. So a little bit of criticism should always be matched with a bit of levity, and you can do both at the same time. Forgive me as I ramble for a moment. Claire Tregesser had a really cool piece this morning. I'm sure it was on last night on NPR or KPBS about local vaccines. Vaccines are being left on the table. A lot of folks who probably qualify or in a category where they could get them are having difficulty getting them because the online portals to make appointments is difficult. And I was struck by the similarities, obviously, that we will be looking at here. And I don't have anywhere to put this frustration, so I'll just throw it at Beto because he's our IT guy. That I can't be the only one who is seeing that so much of this, and that's not real, Beto. I'm not really upset. I'm frustrated, and I know that I can't be the only one who's seeing this. That so much of this program, both for us and across the state and nation, is based on internet access and internet portals. Yet these funds don't, specifically, if I heard correctly, will not assist in payment of cable and internet. And if I imagine if I was a family member who lost my job 6 months ago and I had the decision and I had to decide whether or not to buy food, cut off my water, or cut off the internet, I imagine I would have cut off internet first. Commissioner Mitchell has been really talking about this a lot in the last few months. It really should be seen as a utility. I think that if we're trying to glean successes of the future, perhaps like the most, sausage making internal success I would like to see is future rounds of allocation that support families in our communities should include support for internet access and paying internet and cable bills. I mean, these are not, I think we're seeing, with this more than these are not things that you can just choose to live without, nor are they a luxury, but a necessity. So that's a mind for, and again, I don't think that's anything this body can address, but it's just I feel like it's such an obvious gap that needs to be addressed. also, as we're talking about our partnership with the various CBOs for outreach, I think that it's also worth noting that outreach will be important, and we want to make sure as many folks know about this. But I imagine that many of these our CBO partners are both outreach and application support and follow-up support and all of the other elements as part of the process in this. I'm glad to hear that we're also working with 211, and I'd be interested to just hear about how we are. The low tech follow through is going to be folks probably getting on the phone and needing help filling out applications if they are English as a second or foreign language, if they don't have any English proficiency, if they don't have internet access, and they're working with community partners who they're going to need their help in getting on the phone and making these applications happen. I think that that's something that I'd like to address. And then I'll wrap up my last thing here. Is I've been trying to do the math and figure out how many households this might serve. I imagine at some point in the future, not too distant future, we'll have a better picture of how many households were or are being impacted by this than we can figure out now. So knowing how many households total this program and ERAP have been able to serve would be important. And I'm trying to get everything out in once. And I don't even know if there was a really question in there, but just some of my observations that I'm very mindful of at the moment.
Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate your point about levity. I have one final question that occurs to me a little bit down the road. I have a lot of faith in our landlord community. However, this structure could result down the road in a lot of legal confusion. I mean, undoubtedly is going to result in a lot of legal confusion. Tenant X received the money, but not the landlord because the landlord was unresponsive. There's an eviction proceeding that's happening down the line. There's some documentation somewhere, but tenant X isn't super up to speed on the legalese. Law firms can be very scary. How are we thinking about proof of payment, proof of engagement? This portal is probably going to have to live for a while, so that the courts are able to go back and say, yes, indeed, you did engage in good faith. This chunk of time, you're not liable for that rent because you received it, or your landlord received it, or somebody. So are we at all, what's the thought there?
Let me ask Jeff or Zasazena to talk about how the money will flow once an engagement proceeds. Saying I see you take it, you're mute off, if you would please.
Sure. So there is some guidance in SB 91 that speaks to how much time a landlord has to respond and what information they have to provide before we can disperse a payment. There is language that we are going to abide by as far as sending confirmation to both the tenant and the landlord of the payment that was dispersed and listing the amount of months and the amount of money that was issued. If the landlord does agree to forego 20% of the balance, we actually had a conversation with HCD leadership and asked them to provide us with language that would speak to the landlord waiving the fees and then not being able to come back and sort of pursue those fees in the court of action. They have not provided that information to us, but we have engaged our own legal counsel to help us with the development of that certification for the landlord. And we imagine that would also be shared with the tenant themselves. So there will be payment receipts to both the tenant and the landlord. There will be certification information that the landlord signs off on regarding the 20%. If there is a situation where we disperse a payment directly to the tenant, our legal counsel as well is developing firm language that the tenant has to sign, certifying and agreeing that the funds would be used for the intended purposes, so for rent and or utilities. So those are some of the measures that we have developed at this point.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I definitely want to keep that front of mind so that with or without an economic cliff, we're not running into an administrative.
And we're, as in all new programs, I see Chuck's turned his video back on. In all new programs, we make sure we have our legal advisors in front end. That reduces our need for them back end. And Chuck, I don't know if you have anything to say, but
yeah, I do. we had a situation where landlords would not accept funds in ERAP, and we developed a certification because we were afraid that if we gave the money directly to the tenant and the tenant used it to go to a casino rather than paying for rent, that we would be criticized. So we drafted a rather robust certification indicating that the false use of the improper use of federal funds is a federal crime. And that if you do that, you will most likely go to jail. And so it's very important that you comply with what the grant that we're giving you to pay your rent, and it was just rent under the first thing. We're going to do the same advice in these documents that are currently being drafted. And we think that will probably, in most cases, serve to get the tenant's attention, and that the money will go where it's supposed to go. And on the other side, once the money's out, we could probably put a provision in the documents that say this money must be expended to the landlord within X period of time, and then we can check on the backside to see whether it's occurred as well. So I think there's ways to get there, and we're already thinking about it and working through it.
That's certainly severe. I think I'm approaching it from another angle, though, of can we proactively make sure that information that's going out to the tenants also has Fair Housing Authority sort of contact information. You were saying we're proactively going to think about connecting folks for conciliation and some legal supports, but undoubtedly there's going to be confusion, and some of it's going to be completely human, and some of it's going to be a little less benign. And so to the extent that we can make sure that our tenants have a proactive measure of a defense, or at least someone they can talk to get some good answers, I think that would go a long way. But that does conclude my questions. I'm going to one last final call. Commissioner comments, feedback. With that, we are looking for a motion on this.
I move to approve the motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Davis. Do we have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Hubbard, thank you. We'll go ahead and go through the vote. Vice Chair Ryan Klempner.
Aye.
Commissioner Akers.
Aye.
Commissioner Davis.
Aye.
Commissioner Hubbard.
Aye.
Commissioner Mitchell.
Jay. Aye.
Oh, I get it. I was like,
I just want to.
is that another language? Okay.
Vice Chair
All
Klempner
right.
said aye. After aye comes Jay, so I just want to make sure you're listening.
I am, and thank you for that. Who needs coffee? Okay, I'll add my vote in favor, and our next item is 101, an amendment to an agreement with Remedy Temporary Services, or REMX, to provide temporary staffing. There was no public comments submitted on this item. The Housing Commissioner's Senior Vice President of Compliance and Equity Assurance, Deborah Fischel-Falk, will be presenting. Whenever you're ready.
I am ready. Waiting for the PowerPoint. Good morning, Chair Benvenuto, Commissioners, Mr. Gentry, and Mr. Christensen. I'm Deborah Fischel-Falk, Senior Vice President of Compliance and Equity Assurance. Item 101 is a request for approval to amend an existing contract with REMX for temporary staffing services. Next slide, please. The Rental Assistance Division administered the City of San Diego's COVID-19 Emergency Rental Assistance Program that dispersed more than $13.7 million to help more than 3,700 low-income households experiencing financial hardship due to COVID-19. In order to process and disperse these funds within the established timeframe, it was necessary to hire temporary staff. We utilized an existing as-needed contract with REMX to onboard certain temporary staff members who were subsequently retained in order to work on other Rental Assistance Division projects and to maintain continuity when a new COVID-19 assistance program would begin. Next slide, please. On November 13th, 2020, the board voted 6-0 to recommend the Housing Authority of the City of San Diego authorize an existing MOU be amended to allow the commission to continue to oversee and administer the city's COVID-19 emergency rental assistance program and other related actions. A contract extension and amendments to the existing as-needed contract with Remix was one of those related actions. The amendment included an additional $250,000 to provide temporary staff for the continuing operations of the city's emergency rental assistance program and additional commission staff needs. Unfortunately, the amendment could not be executed because technical difficulties prevented the Housing Authority from taking action on the requested approval at its December 8th, 2020 meeting. Next slide, please. In December, there were strong indications that additional federal funds for rental assistance would likely be approved. And on December 27th, the Federal Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2021 was signed into law that provided $25 billion for nationwide emergency rental assistance, which included funds allocated to the City of San Diego. By leveraging the $5 million in federal funds previously allocated to the city, with the new federal funds, the commission is able to maximize the assistance that could be provided to low-income households impacted by COVID-19. The recommendations we are making today include the necessary approval for staff to indeed execute the amendment to increase the compensation to Remix for costs incurred that exceeded the original contract amount related to the city's COVID-19 emergency rental assistance program, and create capacity for the commission's standard temporary contract needs that was previously approved by the board in November. Next slide, please. We recommend the Board of Commissioners take the following actions. First, approve an increase to the maximum compensation for the current term of the agreement for temporary staffing services with Remedy Temporary Services, LLC, DBA Remix, in the amount of $250,000 for a maximum compensation of $500,000 as identified in the agreement to provide compensation for additional temporary staff onboarded for the administration of the Emergency Rental Assistance Program in response to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and provide for standard staffing needs. Next slide, please. Second, authorize the President and Chief Executive Officer or designee to substitute the funding sources with other available funding sources, provided the total program project budget amount after substitution does not exceed the approved total budget, should the operation need arise, or should such actions be to the benefit of the commission and its mission. And third, authorize the President and CEO or designee to execute all documents and instruments that are necessary and or appropriate to implement these approvals in a form approved by General Counsel, and take actions as are necessary and or appropriate to implement these approvals. Next slide, please. This concludes our presentation, and Mike McKenna, our Vice President of Human Resources, and I are happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, questions? Any comments? Is there a motion?
So moved.
Okay, moved by Commissioner Mitchell. Second?
Second.
Okay, I think Vice Chair Klempner got there first. Let's go ahead and roll call vote. Vice Chair Klempner.
Aye.
Commissioner Akers.
Aye.
Commissioner Davis.
Aye.
Commissioner Hubbard.
Aye.
And Commissioner Mitchell.
Aye.
And I'll add my vote in favor. That motion passes unanimously. And item 102 is the nope, we just did item 102. Excuse me. That does take us through the full agenda, and with that, I think we'll go ahead and adjourn. It is
We have
10:30.
one more item.
Oh, I'm scrolling too fast. You guys have to forgive me. The J threw me off. We are at item 102. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Back in action. Item 102, the approval of the award agreement for temporary staffing for the Housing Stability Assistance Program. No public comments. Senior Vice President Deborah Fishel Falk will also be presenting this item whenever you're ready. My apologies.
Oh, no problem. I am ready and okay. Item 102 is a request for approval to award 3 as-needed temporary staffing contracts to support the administration of the Housing Stability Assistance Program. Next slide, please. The Rental Assistance Division anticipates administering the City of San Diego's COVID-19 Housing Stability Assistance Program on behalf of the City of San Diego. This, of course, is contingent upon the approvals from this board, the San Diego City Council, and the Housing Authority of the City of San Diego. The program will include assistance to pay past due unpaid rent and utilities, and will include an online application portal available to applicants through our website. Next slide, please. Staff will review applications to ensure eligibility, prioritize applications in accordance with federal and state regulations, and calculate and disperse payments. The Rental Assistance Division implemented the city's previous emergency rental assistance program that dispersed more than $13.7 million to help more than 3,700 low-income households experiencing financial hardship due to COVID-19. The Housing Stability Assistance Program has more than 5 times the funding of the previous program available, more flexible payment options, and fewer restrictions. Temporary staff are needed to support and augment existing staff to process and disperse payments. Next slide, please. Manpower, Apple One, and Remix demonstrated the ability to meet the Commission's temporary staffing needs for the previous COVID-19 Emergency Rental Assistance Program, and therefore we are recommending as-needed contracts be executed with each vendor to provide temporary staff in an amounts not to exceed $500,000 each per year, with one renewal option for each agreement. Next slide, please. Specifically, we recommend the Board of Commissioners take the following actions. First, authorize the award of a temporary staffing agreement with Apple One Employment Services in an amount not to exceed $500,000 per year, with one renewal option for temporary staffing as needed to support the administration and operation of the City of San Diego's COVID-19 Housing Stability Assistance Program, contingent upon the Board of Commissioners, the San Diego City Council, and the Housing Authority of the City of San Diego authorizing the HSAP program and funding for the HSAP program. Second, authorize the award of a temporary staffing agreement with Manpower of San Diego in amount not to exceed $500,000 per year, with one renewal option for temporary staffing as needed to support the administration and operation of the City of San Diego's Housing Stability Assistance Program, contingent upon the Board, the Council, and the Housing Authority authorizing the Housing Stability Assistance Program and funding for the Housing Stability Assistance Program. Third, authorize the award of a temporary staffing agreement with Remedy Temporary Services, LLC, DBA Remix, in an amount not to exceed $500,000 per year, with one renewal option for temporary staffing as needed to support the administration and operation of the City of San Diego's Housing Stability Assistance Program, contingent upon the Board, the Council, and the Housing Authority authorizing the program and funding for the program. 4, authorize the President and Chief Executive Officer or designee to substitute the funding sources with other available funding sources, provided the total program project budget amount after substitution does not exceed the approved total budget, should the operation need arise, or should actions be to the benefit of the Commission and its mission. And authorize the President and CEO or designee to execute all documents and instruments that are necessary and or appropriate to implement these approvals in the form approved by General Counsel and take such actions as are necessary and are appropriate to implement these approvals. Next slide, please. That concludes our presentation. And again, Michael McKenna and I are available to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, do we have any questions, comments, feedback? No. Okay. Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Moved by Commissioner Akers. Is there a second? I thought I heard
Second.
Commissioner Davis. Thank you. Go ahead and vote. Vice Chair Clumpner,
Aye.
Commissioner Akers,
Aye.
Commissioner Davis,
Aye.
Commissioner Hubbard,
Aye.
and Commissioner Mitchell has left. So I'll go ahead and add my aye vote. That motion carries unanimously. And that will conclude the board special meeting today, unless, of course, I cannot read entirely. We are adjourned at 10:36. Thank you, everybody, for your time this morning.
Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.